On the surface, Rugrats seemed like a wholesome children's cartoon that shows the beautiful interminglings of various families that have now passed their friendships down to their children, but some fans of the show have spotted some interesting habits that might change the way you see them forever, and let's just say they're not as innocent as they look. That's right, there's a chance that while fans were watching Tommy and his babbling friends go on imaginative adventures, Stu and Dee Dee were off numbing their minds. Now, this wouldn't be the first time that an animated series has been suspected of hiding or even being about drug use, with the world being none the wiser. The most popular examples are shows like Beavis and Butthead, Teletubbies, or even more recent cartoons like Uncle Grandpa. I also don't think that there's any speculation that the Teletubbies was not made by a sound mind, because you gotta be on something to think of all that. But I digress. So fans have speculated that all of those shows and more take place within some sort of strange drug-induced hallucination. But to think that the seemingly wholesome parents in the Rugrats were off doing some, let's say, extracurriculars while their children were free range to do whatever they wanted is a little off-putting to say the least. But the first clue actually comes from another theory online that points out exactly how neglectful the adults in the Rugrats actually were. The theory itself basically covers the concept that Stu, Drew, and the rest of the parents in the show were actually terrible parents, but the main focal point here is the fact that in almost every episode of the show, they could be seen neglecting their family. Now, not every parent in the world can be a helicopter parent that just hangs around their children all day, and they shouldn't have to be, but the amount of time that these babies and toddlers were left unsupervised was pretty ridiculous. And sure, you can argue that more often than not, the babies were left in a playpen where they should have been safe or under the supervision of Tommy's grandpa Lou. But I'm not trying to hear all that. I don't want to hear reasonable arguments, because when you think about how often those safety measures prove to be ineffective in the show, it becomes pretty apparent that the adults didn't really care enough to change their techniques and properly watch after their kids, like, regular parents do. In fact, that could be a result of the parents' possible drug habits. Perhaps they were so preoccupied with getting high that they didn't even think that they could take better care of their kids. Now, just in case you think that calling Dee Dee and the other parents in the Rugrats neglectful is too harsh, let's take a look at just a few of the many instances where they should have been paying better attention. Starting with possibly the most terrifying and life-threatening incident that the babies found themselves in, which was actually in the Rugrats movie. In the movie, the Rugrats introduced the youngest pickle in the world, Dill. Yeah, that was actually their name, and in turn, the other babies saw themselves getting less and less attention. In fact, all of the children had such little supervision that they managed to get lost in the woods after falling out of the back of a shipping truck that picked them up by mistake because, you guessed it, nobody was watching them. This kind of sounds like a bit of a redneck problem, but that's not even the worst part, because while they were trying to survive and make their way out of the forest, the kids were harassed by circus monkeys and hunted by a bloodthirsty wolf. Definitely a redneck problem. If it wasn't for Tommy's dog Spike, most of the babies wouldn't have made it out of those woods alive, and it wouldn't be surprising to hear that the reason the babies were left alone to be watched by Grandpa Lou was that their parents were indulging in their drug habits. Another instance where the Rugrats' parents were shown to be super neglectful was in the episode Ruthless Tommy. After once again delegating babysitting responsibility to the old and tired Grandpa Lou, the Pickle family almost lost their son to a group of kidnappers. I mean, they're called the Pickles, what did you expect? Anyways, it was after Grandpa Lou inevitably fell asleep that Tommy woke up and found that his parents had left the front door wide open, and like a moth drawn to a flame, he walked right out into the yard. And while nobody was supervising Tommy, the toddler was kidnapped by two adults who believed that they could hold him ransom, thinking that he was the son of billionaire Ronald Thump. Man, I don't remember the Rugrats being this wild. We got Trump references, ransom, kidnapping. How is this a kid's show? Anyways, so while it's not a crime to leave your child with their grandparent, because imagine if it was, just wow, the crime rates. But like, after the 10th time of them almost losing the kid because they couldn't pay attention to them, you would think that the parents would probably choose a new babysitter. But as mentioned before, according to the theory, Tommy's parents were too preoccupied with doing drugs to properly think about childcare. Now, this last example involves the episode At the Movies, during which it seems like the adults once again neglected their children. No shocker there. In the episode, the parents took the babies to see a Dummy Bears movie, but after seeing that Reptar was playing in a different theater, the little rascals managed to sneak out and almost burn the movie theater to the ground. I really gotta rewatch this show. All the while, Stu, Dee Dee, and the other adults were too preoccupied to even realize the babies weren't watching the movie with them. Now, that could have been because the Dummy Bears movie was so good that the parents just couldn't look away from the screen. Or perhaps, before watching the movie, the adults decided to indulge in some illegal activities that altered their state of mind. And after using their drugs of choice, they genuinely became enthralled with the film. By now, you can clearly see that the parents in the Rugrats were beyond neglectful, and no one can say with 100% certainty that this neglect didn't stem from some sort of drug use. Now, even though the creators of the Rugrats never showed it, it's not hard to speculate what substances the adults might have been using based on the way they acted when on screen. For instance, Tommy and Dill's parents, Stu and Dee Dee, most likely used psychoactive substances to help inspire and relax the two creative parents. I mean, I guess it didn't inspire them to be good parents, but hey, you can't have it all. But just take a look at Stu. He was designed as a longtime inventor who mainly creates amazing looking children's toys that tended to make real-world kids jealous. And even though many fans might think that his inspiration for all the creative toys that he designed, like the Reptar wagon, came from his son Tommy and eventually Dill, there's actually a chance that it came from ideas that he had while under the influence of LSD. And on top of that, Stu and Dee Dee look tired almost every second they're on screen together, which could hint that while they're not watching their two sons, they're both getting absolutely stoned together. In fact, cannabis use might be a habit that most of the adults in the series indulged in, especially Howard DeVille, the father of Phil and Lil. Really, these names are just not that creative, although pretty clever, but not creative. Anyways, they say to never judge a book by its cover, but that man just screams middle-aged pothead that likes to lounge around all day. Like, I don't know, your uncle. But Howard was also portrayed in the original series as very quiet and relaxed compared to the rest of the adults, and though that could merely be a sign that he was an introvert, some fans have also linked it to the possibility that Mr. DeVille was simply a stoner. As for Howard's wife, Betty, who is practically the exact opposite of him, was more likely under the influence of some sort of upper. Because of how active and rambunctious Betty seemed to be, she may have also simply been using performance-enhancing drugs or steroids of sorts. Honestly though, she's the most challenging character to picture as someone who used drugs frequently, but I guess it could be anyone. But I digress. Characters like Charlotte and Drew Pickles are a different story altogether though. Drew was Stu's brother and Tommy's uncle in the show, and he was shown to be very uptight compared to the other members of the Pickles family. Honestly, I'll never get over that name. But whatever. Drew was often shown to be very irritable, and even though he wasn't very aggressive, he certainly had a short fuse, which suggests that he might have been using a stimulant such as cocaine. In fact, that would actually make a lot of sense when you look at his wife Charlotte, who was the CEO of Megacorp. She was always working in the show and almost constantly on her phone as if she was a broker on Wall Street. And even though it's a little cliche, it's a common trope in TV that successful business people who always seem like they're in work mode tend to use drugs like cocaine to keep themselves going. And the last family to cover, thank God, is perhaps the saddest of the bunch, and that's the Finster family. We're going out with a bang, ladies and gentlemen. So Chaz, the single father who lost his wife to what the show claimed was a terminal illness, was shown as an overprotective and paranoid parent. Honestly, out of everybody, I wouldn't blame him for using drugs. And while it's not likely that Chaz was using narcotics or what would be considered as hard drugs, there is certainly the chance that he would use cannabis. It's a well-known fact that some, if not most people who get stoned tend to feel a bit of paranoia, and it's also known to be used by some people to treat their depression. And following the death of Chucky's mother, Melinda, Chaz was clearly heartbroken, and it wouldn't be surprising to hear that he started smoking a bit of grass to help himself relax a little bit. But hang on, it potentially gets worse. According to this theory, there's even a chance that Melinda's death wasn't related to a terminal illness, but instead she died after years of substance abuse took its toll on her body. And while the right thing to do is hope that's not true, you can never really know until the creators of the series denounce or confirm the theory. And the last thing to ask now is, what do you think? Is there a chance that all of the adults in the Rugrats were hooked on some sort of illegal drug, or do you think that they were just overly neglectful parents? Make sure you let me know in the comments below.